Good evening. Today is February the 15th, 2025. I hope everybody has had a good day. I want to go back 50 years to an important month, February of 1975. Have very vivid memories of a number of events that month. We'll talk about some things that were in the news, and then I'll get closer to home and talk about what I was dealing with at the time. On February 1st was a Saturday. U.S. President Gerald Ford announced that the 1976 fiscal year budget would reflect a deficit of $52 billion. At that time, this was the largest peacetime deficit in the nation's history. And of course, President Ford was committed to reducing the deficit. On February 2nd, Ethiopian troops massacred 103 civilians in the village of Woki Duba after driving Eritrean forces out of the town. And on February 6th, thieves in Italy broke into the Ducal Palace Art Museum, stole the paintings of La Muta by Raphael, the masterpieces Flagellation of Christ and Madonna di Senegali by Piero della Francesca, considered to be three of the 10 most famous Italian paintings from the Renaissance. The works were recovered unharmed on March 24th, 1976, from a hotel room in Locarno, Switzerland. On February 10th, the Council of the European Community passed the Equal Pay Directive, requiring the member states to follow the principle of equal pay for men and women. And on February 16th, at a meeting in Cape Town, South Africa, Prime Minister B.J. Vorster informed visiting Prime Minister Ian Smith of Rhodesia that the white minority government of South Africa would no longer provide troops to protect Rhodesia's white minority government. Smith, who had been reassured earlier of the Vorster government's support, said later that the decision had struck him like a bolt from the blue. Rhodesia's government would fall in 1979 as a black majority government took power and the nation was renamed Zimbabwe. It was in 1994 that apartheid came to an end in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela was elected the first black prime minister. On February 21st, former U.S. Attorney General John N. Mitchell, former Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman, and former presidential advisor John Ehrlichman were each sentenced to a minimum of 2.5 years in prison by U.S. District Judge John Sirica. All three had been convicted in January of obstruction of justice charges in connection with the Watergate scandal. Mitchell joked with reporters about his famous wife, for whom he was separated. It could have been a lot worse. He could have sentenced me to spend the rest of my life with Martha Mitchell. So she got a lot of negative publicity at the time, much more so than he did. And then on February the 26th, President Ford became the first incumbent U.S. president to play in a PGA golf tournament as an amateur in the Pro-Am event with the Jackie Gleason and Very Classic. The crowd of 41,720, the largest for a single day on a PGA Tour event, watched as the president shot 100 on 18 holes in partnership with Jack Nicklaus, Jackie Gleason, Bob Hope, and the New York businessman Elliot Kahn, who donated $10,000 to golf in Florida with the celebrities. So we see a lot of different things were going on that month. At that time, I was living in Teague, Texas, and I was working for the Texas Department of Public Welfare, now known as Health and Human Services. I had started work there on December 2nd. The first 6 months I was there, I worked like 50 to 60 hours a week. Only got paid for 40, but that was all right. I loved the work I was doing. At the time, I was not pastoring a church, and I wasn't married. But the main things I had going on in my life was my job and my master's thesis on the Nation of Islam. On February 25th, two deaths. I was affected by two deaths that occurred. One, someone I knew very well, and someone whom I never met, but who I knew a lot about. On February the 25th of 1975, my aunt, Lily Mae McKenzie, passed away in Mahia. Mahia is 14 miles from Teague. She was the widow of Alfred Boss McKenzie, who Uncle Boss lived from July 10th, 1888 to November 4th, 1955. From 1926 to 1932, he was sheriff of Limestone County, and from 1932 to 1955, he was chief of police in Mahia. Aunt Lily was the sister of my grandmother, who died in 1970, and she lived from April 19th, 1888 to February 25th, 1975. They lived at 507 North Sherman Street in Mahia. That's a picture of their house. It's still standing today. And on February the 27th, I attended Aunt Lily's funeral at Blair Stubbs Funeral Home in Mahia. As I say, I was working on a thesis on the Nation of Islam, the black Muslims at that time. And it was on February 25th, 1975, that the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, he was born on October 7th, 1897. At the age of 77, he had passed away in Chicago. That's a picture of Elijah Muhammad. Earlier, I mentioned President Gerald Ford. He was the last Shriner in the White House, and this is a picture of him in his Shrine Fez from Solomon Temple in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He sent a representative to his administration, had a representative at Elijah Muhammad's funeral. And later that year, when the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas celebrated its centennial, President Ford sent a greeting to the Prince Hall Masons of Texas, identifying himself as a fellow Mason. It was on February 27th, 1975, as I say,